I never actually know if the first 10 seconds are included or not in the stream. So, regardless, I'm just going to start saying hi. Hello, Rasa community. I am here today with Tom, our wonderful Director of Engineering. That's your title, right?
Yes, it is.
I got it.
Hey from my end as well. I'm so glad to be here to join you this hour. Talk about questions, talk about Rasa, anything.
I'm excited to have you here, and that's the end of that sentence. Oh, sorry, we're both, it's very early for me, and pretty late for Tom, so we're both going to be maybe like a tiny bit punchy, I would say. But question I have for you, Tom. So you've been on the stream before, and you've talked about sort of like what you do day to day, so folks can go back and watch that one if they're interested in. But question that I have, and I understand that you're not going to be able, or maybe you won't want to like share everything about it, but I know that Rasa 2.0 launch was last year. Yeah, it must have been last year. Yeah. And I think it will be maybe no surprise that, you know, we're in active development, and at some point Rasa 3.0 is going to happen. Hi, Nick. Welcome. So if you want to maybe share, you know, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, I'm sure the Rasa community would be all ears.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I mean, we have a lot of things planned. The only thing, again, we're an open source company and we want to be as much open as possible, but at the same time, I don't want to make promises that we cannot hold, especially on the research side. There's so many things still moving, and
we're going to solve NLP and we'll have like human level language models.
Yeah, definitely. No, but we do have some project that we're pretty excited about, and I mean, one big topic that we're working on are models that work kind of end to end, where we kind of avoid intent classification and kind of process the text directly, and kind of combine that with our kind of understanding of the conversation at this point in time, right? And combining that directly with an incoming message rather than going through our kind of intent classification model. And that, like, we're super excited about that because we think kind of that the combination of kind of handling messages directly and also being able to kind of define intents, that combination is kind of super powerful, and we'll kind of stay in that sweet spot where we need both of kind of these different models, like the intent-less model and the one where we have these buckets. So we'll stay in that sweet spot of using both at the same time for a bit until we figure out, as Rachel said, like how to do it without intent completely. And so we do need to do quite a bit of work. We already shipped kind of end-to-end as an experimental feature, I think back in December last year.
Sounds right.
But there's quite a number of things that we haven't figured out in terms of workflows, how you annotate data, like how you properly test it, and then also from the code structure perspective, we still have that very strong split between NLU and core in our code base, and that makes just some things a little harder. Like, I don't know, taking a look at the context while you do intent classification is something that we would have loved to do for quite some time, but it's just tricky to do with the current architecture and how we move data around. Which means that for intent classification right now, it's tricky for us to include kind of what certain slots are set, for example. That's just so yeah, these are kind of things that we're working on, is kind of moving end to end forward, taking another look at how the larger code base is structured, especially with respect to kind of NLU and core split. And we have some interesting ideas that we're currently exploring. Should we go for a processing graph where you have components in there that move data around, making things more flexible? So we do have some interesting ideas that we want to try out and work on. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll see some of that end up in the 3.0 release.
Knock on wood.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I mean, I don't think just while we're waiting for folks to ask their questions in the chat, I think it's an interesting and useful conversation. If you've been sort of like following, I don't know, the Rasa cinematic universe for a while, I don't think it's a surprise that we're moving towards getting rid of intents. It's been something that we've talked a lot about publicly, particularly Alan has talked about it publicly quite a bit. And it's a really interesting problem. And you mentioned the sort of like core NLU divide. So for folks who have only ever used Rasa 2, way back, I want to say it's like a Rasa 0 feature where like the core, which is the dialogue policies, and the NLU, which is the intent classification and the entity detection, were like completely separate. And there was like you would take the input from one and put it into the other. So it's a lot of tech debt.
That's true, yeah. We started with NLU in the beginning, so kind of just intent classification. And then at some point we thought, hey, we also need to tackle the dialogue part, and that's where Rasa core came into the picture. It's been a while. No, it's true. Yeah, I mean, in addition to kind of more of these kind of more research-heavy topics, so kind of figuring out how to move forward and end-to-end, as I said, like how to move away from intent. We're also looking into how to support larger data sets, for example. Now that we've been around for a while, we also see that, and I mean, we encourage that a lot, right? Like you need to collect more conversations, you need to train on real world data sets. And so, well, I mean, the longer your bot runs and the more data you collect, the longer also your training data time, train times get.
Yeah, it takes
long. And yeah, I mean, you might even run out of memory, right? So we've seen that on some of the data sets. And that's also something that we're looking into right now. So how to be able to process larger data sets and making the best use of them. So that's also something that we've planned for.
And especially when I, talk to folks who are building, big assistants for enterprises, like the scale of data use is dramatically different from someone who's building like a fun hobby project. So we do have a question from Nick. Thank you, Nick, and welcome Mina and Dimitri. Is Razer planning to build a customizable interface like other chatbots are using and providing, such as BotPress, Dialogflow, BotKit, etc., where some non-technical team can develop apart from Rasa X?
That's a great question, and that's definitely something that has been on our mind for quite some time. It's a very interesting space, so kind of this prototyping space, and also that step from moving from a prototype that you kind of discuss in your team, that can be using to kind of scope the project, and how you move from such a prototype and mock bot into an actual bot that you can then work on and also feed with lots of conversations to kind of stable. And right now we think that we could provide some unique functionality there, kind of integrating that very well with Rasa. But we think at this time we can provide a lot more value in exploring conversations and moving them into your training data, exploring how users talk to your bots, kind of further down in that development kind of pipeline. And we're not as much focusing right now on that initial step of creating that first prototype. I mean, these are great tools, and so what we're currently looking into and like trying to push more for are kind of integrations, right? Where you can create a bot in, bot mock or bot society, and then export that into a Rasa bot that you can then use. One big part of Rasa X, though, is kind of that collaboration in a bot development team, right? So you have a product owner, you have developers in there, you have business users in there, right? So that's something that we certainly want to tackle as part of Rasa X. So I don't know, changing responses or figuring out which workflows need to be added to a bot. So kind of once your bot is live, that anything that you want to do as a team, that's something that we want to these workflows are some that we want to replicate in Rasa X and really make them kind of super easy. That's what we're working on, right? Just kind of this first part of mocking conversations is something that for now we've not actively doing.
I was looking for, there's a blog post that Karen wrote on the Rasa blog about conversational AI teams and sort of like the different roles that you would have in that team. And I can't find it right now, just searching for it really quick. So I'll post about it on the YouTube community tab if I remember, because I think it's really helpful. And on the one hand, I definitely get that Rasa feels like a developer tool, but on the other hand, I would be surprised if you had a Rasa assistant that didn't have a developer on the team working on it in some capacity. Pen that works. Post Rasa teams. In the meantime, Amina has a question. So you guys are talking about Rasa 3, which sounds exciting, yet I have a question. I struggled a little bit migrating from Rasa 1 to 2 with forms and rules. Do you have an idea on how to make that easier later on?
I mean, for the switch from 1 to 2, we try to automate as much as possible. Certainly that we couldn't automate everything. Like we introduced new concepts, especially around forms and rules, where it just wasn't possible to kind of automatically map one concept to the new one. But it was inevitable to do. So even though we kind of hate to do these changes, and we know that it's always a struggle for everyone to kind of port from an older version to the new and hyped version. We're trying to limit that as much as possible and automate as much as we can. And we'll do the same for 3.0. I would think that we will have less of these issues just because we're going to kind of touch on kind of fewer of the top level concepts. So when we think about Rasa 2.0, one big thing that we did is kind of switching the training data format. And at least for now, so we don't have anything like that planned, right? So I'd imagine that more things in the API will stay stable compared to kind of the switch from 1.0 to 2.0. And it's more about kind of adding new capabilities, changing some workflows. And I mean, we have some things that we already deprecated, and we're probably going to deprecate a couple more things. But I'd imagine that the switch is going to be a bit easier.
I think with rules in particular, the fact that they are now all these things that were sort of like different separate things in the code base, having them be in a central place with a more standardized format, I think will also help with that switch.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And especially around form and rules, it was tricky because we moved kind of the forum logic from the Rasa SDK, so kind of from the part of the code base that you work with when you write custom action code, things your bot needs to execute, and kind of move that into kind of the core Rasa framework. And so that meant some migrations.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's going to be a while, I will say. We're going to be on 2 for at least the next little bit. But yeah, and keep an eye on the forum as well. Put up my little animation because I imagine at some point we'll be looking for folks to offer feedback and testing as we did with the 2.0 migration. I'm not promising that, but it seems likely.
It's very likely that we'll reach out for some folks to test it out. Give it a spin.
Another question from Nick. Is Rasa working on providing more insight on performance, evaluation, user engagements, and analytics reports to the developers, apart from the current intent, entity, confidence, hit, miss, and prediction?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think this is a super interesting topic, and there's multiple dimensions to it, right? So what I'm not sure if we've already shipped Intent Insights.
Yes, Intent Insights
Yes,
is
we
out.
have shipped it. So that's kind of one step in that direction, right? So helping you as a bot developer better understand where a conversation goes wrong, right? What do you need to do to improve the bot? And that's kind of a big topic for us for Rasa X. So really using that data that we get from conversations with users and kind of providing insights into how to improve the system.
I'll just
yeah, you're showing that in Docs right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is on Rasa X, and we have reports on the different intents, and the sort of general idea is this helps you to, when you are doing data annotation, once your bot's in production, figure out what intents that maybe you should focus on, what particular turns might be very helpful to focus on annotating. Because when we mentioned about like really large data, like I once you get to millions and millions of conversations a day, you're probably going to be annotating a sample rather than all of them. So can you help pick a sample that's going to be probably more helpful?
Yeah, so no. So,
I was just going to say, and I'm sure you have other things you wanted to bring up.
So that's just kind of one step in that direction, and we're kind of actively working right now together with our research team on kind of more of these insights, so kind of gathering knowledge around conversations and kind of bringing that back to you as a developer to kind of then improve the system. So that's kind of one part of it, and the other part that you're talking about with kind of analytics reports and user engagement that we're looking into is like just stats on kind of bot usage, how many conversations were successful, how many business transactions were successful, for example, is also a great measure to see what the impact of that assistant is. And so we're working on that as well. And it will probably be a split. So some of the data we very likely gonna evaluate inside Rasa X, but we're also looking into how to connect external tools that are kind of traditionally used to explore lots of metrics and plotting and creating dashboards and such things. So we don't want to create dashboards on ourselves right now, but we certainly want to enable you to dig deeper into kind of the analytics that are important.
Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question, Nick. And we know it's a need for people. It's something we're actively thinking about. And I would say the big takeaway is that measuring conversations is hard. Question from Ahmad. Sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. Speaking about the training data format, I had an issue in testing a Rasa model on already split data, training and testing. And the documentation is unclear on how to achieve that. How should the test file look?
So if you're intending to kind of test the whole conversation, the format should pretty much be the same as you use for your training data. And so your test stories will be the same as the training stories. So we intentionally kept the format the same.
I'll pop up this.
Exactly.
There you go.
And there's one addition that you have in your test stories if you want to test your NLU performance in addition to testing the dialogue performance. So if you want to test that NLU performance as well, then you need to add kind of user messages as shown on the screen to your stories. And these will be treated as kind of examples that your bot needs to get right. So if your assistant doesn't classify hello in this case as a greet intent, that test will fail and the whole story will show up as a failed test. So we're kind of testing both stories and equals. testing the NLU model only. I am not 100% sure what the format there is.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty much the same as we use for, or it should be the same as we use for training.
Yeah, and I would say if you're really struggling with something in the docs, I would file a GitHub issue about it, because the documentation is part of what we open source. So, yeah, or ask on the forums.
Definitely. And especially if you're running into an exception or something like that, please don't hesitate to send us that stack trace.
So hopefully that helps some out. I'm sorry that you're having a rough time. And Nick says, anything is in engineering mind to provide a front-end GUI that we can deploy on our website apart from Rasa web chat and chat room. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading today. It's very hard to customize Rasa and GUI on sites. Yeah.
It is like you would be reading our minds. No, honestly, like that's been on our roadmap for quite some time, and we're working on that right now. So we already had kind of the chat widget inside of Rasa X, and we also have a chat widget on our documentation. I'm not sure that's live right now, but
not right now. But
we have a
keep
chat
your eyes on the space.
So we're working right now to kind of extract that and kind of provide that as a component that you can use on your website, make it easy to kind of connect that to your system, just run that on your web page, and also customize that, right? So we're actively working on that right now.
Well, I, for one, am definitely looking forward to it, because I would say that I am not really a front-end person, and I would love for someone who's good at that to make something that looks good and works. Howard says, I already did that. I'm guessing filing a GitHub issue. Thank you. It'll go into the hopper, and someone will take a look, and you're very welcome. Hi, Mohammed. Another question from Nick, who has lots of queries today. Nothing wrong with that. I love to see engaged community members. Can we automate the scheduling on training the model, running the action server, and updating data on Rasa or Rasa X? It'll save maintenance time. Just an overview, is it possible?
I'm not
I know
100% sure what you mean with automating the schedule.
Personally, if I knew I wanted to... Okay, so I would say there's two parts to this, just from my standpoint, and Tom might have different thoughts here. So A, there's no reason to retrain your model unless you've annotated new data, and presumably you know if you've annotated the data or if your team has annotated the data. So I'm no point redeploying if it's going to be the exact same model, right? And if I knew that, like, every Monday, everyone does all their annotating, so it makes sense to, run this every Tuesday, I'd probably just write a cron job and to run it on my server, because I'm efficient, which is a polite way of saying lazy.
One thing I'd like to add is that if you store your data in, for example, GitHub repositories, you can automate kind of the training, for example, using GitHub Actions, and we're kind of providing some templates for that. So kind of actions we can use right from the GitHub Marketplace. And yeah,
pull that up.
An example. And what this will do is, as soon as you push new training data to your repository, let's say you've annotated a couple of new examples, or you've added a new intent, this will get triggered and will train a new model, and it will also be able to kind of create a new action server image, kind of a new Docker image, and from there you can create another step to also deploy that somewhere. That is a little bit more dependent on how you spin up your service and where that's deployed, so we couldn't provide a template for that just yet. But kind of training and also building the image will already get you quite far. And for kind of the deployment Docker containers, there are already a lot of available actions around that you can reuse depending on deploying on Google Cloud or deploying. So yeah, this is certainly very cool if you're on GitHub, and if you're somewhere else, just check out these GitHub actions. The code in there is pretty straightforward, and I think you should be able to adopt that for, I don't know, a Travis workflow.
Yeah, definitely. I plumb forgot about the actions. And I would also say if your name is not centered, sorry, let me just scooch that on over. I would also say that if you're worried about your model taking a really long time to train, I would probably recommend using incremental training. So if possible, it will update the existing model instead of retraining from scratch. So that would be my general recommendation. Dimitri asks, what's the simplest way to extend Web Runner with extra request context data, headers, etc.? Thank you. I don't know what either of those things are.
I could take a step in the dark. I mean, we do have kind of the web server as part of Rasa open source that you can spin up. So let me know if that's not what you're referring to. I mean, the code is open source, right? So you'd need to fork it, change kind of the parts that you need, move in, kind of read out the data. In this case, the headers from the request as it hits the Rasa open source server, and then from there you can use kind of the Docker files that we provide in there to kind of create a new image, for example, if you want to spin it up in Docker, or create a new Python package. So all the code we use to kind of publish the package and ship it to the Python package repository or the Docker images is also part of the repository. So if you fork our open source repository and change, for example, the data that you want to read out of these headers, you should be able to package that up again and reuse it. And I hope all the instructions should be in README. So.
Yeah, I hope that helps, Dimitri. And I'm glad Tom was here, because I don't think I could have helped you on that one. Mohammed wants to know, if I have an entity that contains locations, like 20 countries, and I want to make a story containing intents with the entities that have locations, should I write like 20 stories to cover all my locations, or is there another way?
That's a really good question. And it depends on your use case. So there's two scenarios, right? One is where the value of the country doesn't matter, and the other one is where the value of the country influences how the conversation continues. And so these are in general kind of the two different or kind of the two different scenarios that you need to decide when kind of picking what you want to do with slots. And slots are what we use to kind of store exactly that information in the dialog. So we would, for example, in this case, store the value for that country in one of our slots. So if you talk about a specific example, user says, I'm from Germany in this case, then we would store that value Germany in one of our slots, and then we can either kind of make predictions depending on the value, or we can only make predictions depending if any value is set or not set. So in the first case, if kind of Germany influences the dialog, yes, you would need to provide different stories for different values, right? Because you want kind of the value to influence how this kind of the conversation goes on. And in the second case, we're kind of, it's not important what the value is, just if there's any value set, right? In that case, just pick a random value. It doesn't matter. You can just pick one example that you use across all your stories, or you can also use different countries in this case, and it will work. And one thing that you need to watch out for is what kind of slot you pick to store this value. So in your domain configuration, where you set up your bot, you need to specify a slot's type, and this will influence which of these two scenarios I just described you're going to pick. And they're slots of type string, I think. Text? No, it's text, I think.
Text. I think it's text, yeah.
And that will do the second scenario, right? So the value will be, the value won't matter. Kind of the value that we store in that slot won't matter, just if it is set or not set. And then we can also have categorical slots. And here, kind of the value really does have an influence. And if you want to go be really fancy, you can also create your own slot types and like featureize them and kind of implement the machine learning parts that we need for our dialog policies. But like we do provide kind of the basics types for these two scenarios that we use. Most of the time, probably the country shouldn't influence the dialog. Depends a little on what you're aiming for.
You could also potentially use entity roles, right? So if like 5 of the countries you're going to need a visa for, and the other 14 you don't, and the difference is, hey, I want to check if this is a country I need a visa for, and if so, I'm going to remind somebody. You could use entity roles for that to add a little bit of additional information. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And adding to that, there's one more way to do it. If you really want, if you have kind of a split where some countries you want to have, as Richard just said, like for some countries you want to do kind of one conversational path, and for some countries you want to do another, you can also use a custom action, right? And you can write a custom action, and kind of depending on the value of that slot, you can set another slot and kind of have the conversation take different routes based on the value of that slot as well. So for example, let's really talk about an example. If we're talking about countries that are in the EU, that certainly requires a little bit of logic. So because countries move in and out, as we've learned. So you could write a custom action that kind of takes a look at what's the value of the country slot, and then sets another slot, maybe called is in EU. And you can set that slot to true or false. You got a Boolean slot there, and you can write stories depending on kind of is the value of that slot true, or kind of providing other examples where the value of that is country in EU. If that is set to false, then.
So that was a little bit of a long answer.
Yes.
But the question is, it depends if you need to write a bunch of different stories. And also, not all stories have to be like a complete conversation, especially if you're using an augmented memoization policy. They can just be like the relevant snippets of a conversation. Yeah. So, yeah. I hope that helps, Mohammed. It was a very thorough answer. Nick has a question. Have you ever encountered the need to fetch a large data set, 1,000+ question answers, from Excel or JSON or CSV or some other sort of like source, rather than adding manually in an intent and response in the domain files? Any suggestions?
I mean, I haven't done it. So, I mean, since it sounds like you need to annotate them, I guess you need to go through them at least once. So I'd probably automate kind of the conversation part from CSV to YAML, and then go through them.
I know this is a project that Nick's been working on for a little bit, so yeah, I hope you're making good progress on it. Amina says, can I build a story with multiple forms? Yes.
That was a quick one.
Yes. Nice, easy question. And I'll say, if you want multiple forms to set the same slots, it might get a little bit trickier. I don't know that that's what you want to do, though. So I'm only going to address that if that's something that you specifically want to do. Randall asks, is there any way to customize the Razer X user UI? So like the little chat widget. I'd like to add a talking avatar, for example. Oh, fun.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not possible. So for Rasa X, you can't customize the UI. But I mean, as we talked about earlier, we're trying to open source and provide a chat widget for example, websites, and the talking avatar would be great.
And for folks who haven't run into this before, so Rasa open source is open source. Rasa X is free but not open source. So unfortunately, you can't modify Rasa X yourself. You can make feature requests on GitHub, and we may or may not get to them. There's so much we want to do, you know? Habib says hello. Hello. Do choose another question? Do you plan to allow a somehow more generic way than forking the whole source code? And I think this is in reference to the question about the web runner and request context.
Right. It's a great question. And I mean, since we're an open source project, we're also very heavily interested in kind of community projects, community contributions, and we want to make that as easy as possible. And for the parts where we know that like these are the pieces that you definitely would like to modify, and I'm talking about custom policies, custom machine learning models, custom components in your machine learning pipelines. We made it quite straightforward to modify them and kind of integrate them without forking the whole repository. So we're trying to kind of provide these hooks, or however you'd call them, where you can kind of inject custom code without forking the whole project, which obviously is a little easier to maintain as long as you kind of stick to the API of that hook that you're implementing. And I mean, we're looking into providing more, but we can't cover everything. I guess that's normal. So we're trying to kind of cover most use cases, and for some it will be a little, you won't get around to kind of working the whole repository.
I hope that helps you, Dimitri.
Yeah, it probably won't help you for the web runner right now, but I'm trying to make it easier for the parts.
Habib says, oh, this is an interesting suggestion. We need a roadmap for Rasa in the docs with a short explanation about the feature's use case. Sort of a glossary, but simpler, and with arrows. It's like I'm guessing like a system diagram of like a hypothetical assistant that has all of our features. Is sort of what I'm getting from that description.
Interesting. I'd like to see that as well. You also mentioned the roadmap, so that's something that we're looking into. So we want to get to kind of a public roadmap as well. But yeah, that's kind of why we didn't do it just yet, is that there's so many things in motion and so many ideas that we're exploring. It's hard to predict just now, even in which order we're going to work on things. It depends a little on kind of what the research results show, depends a little on where we're moving next. Right. That's something that we have on our list to do.
Yeah. And if anyone feels very called to create this, please feel free to make a contribution. We try to make it nice and easy, and we'd love to have your contributions. Nick says, when will Sarah be online? It's been ages since I chatted with Sarah. She's still waiting for a server. And second part of the question, what server are you using for Sarah deployment? I don't know that we have like a firm date for Sarah being back up. It is, the source code for Sarah is available on our GitHub, Rasa HQ. I don't think I mentioned it. I need to make a little animation with our GitHub. I got it for the forums, but the GitHub. So Sarah, TBD. And then for the server used for Sarah deployment.
We're using Google Cloud, and we spin up Sarah in a Kubernetes cluster using the Docker files that we provide. I think as part of the Sarah image and a Sarah repository on GitHub, and the Docker images that we provide as part of the Rasa Office Hours. So yeah, Google Cloud and Kubernetes.
We can take a look at this. Yep. I have no idea how big the image is. Sorry, how big the server is off the top of my head, but yeah. Yeah, and Sarah is, the plan is to have her return at some point, but you might be getting the impression from this particular Q&A that there's a lot that we want to do at Rasa, and prioritizing things is hard and important, and is sort of our... certainly my team is right now talking a lot about prioritizing, and I think the engineering team is as well.
So yeah, I mean, if you want to help us out, we do have lots of job posts. Feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, I mean, Sarah is important to us, and we really like to use it in dog food work with Rasa Open Source ourselves. So I'm sure we'll have a comeback there.
And also, I think this just went up today, actually. It's from our last offsite where the team was all together. And there are now many more people on the Rasa team. We're going pretty fast. But if you want to join these fine folks and also the other folks, scroll. We have quite a few open positions. There's one on my team if you're a Mandarin speaker. And then also quite a few on the engineering team. So we'd love to have you. Dimitri says, thanks anyway. Sorry, I hope that helps. Hello, Detox Mango. Welcome to the stream. So give a little pause while we wait for more questions to roll in as people have them. But question for you, Tom, that I don't think I've asked you on stream yet, but I do like to ask people because I think it's really interesting. What is your favorite or least favorite conversational assistant / chatbot that you've interacted with?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would actually need to agree with Nick. So I do like Sarah just because I can peek behind the curtain and know what's going on. So that's super interesting to kind of use it from both sides, like talking to it, and then also being able to see why it's working or why it's not working. So that's super interesting. And yeah, I certainly enjoyed kind of using N26 Assistant. I used that in the app pretty well. So yeah.
I think it's a good answer. I'm also looking forward to having Sarah back again. Nick says, can we deploy the bot without having any cloud platform with the use of Docker only or a different Docker container? Just a thought, is it possible?
Oh yeah, definitely. So you can deploy completely without Docker. I mean, if you have your trained model, put that on the server, install Rasa open source there. You can deploy your bot using just that, bare metal on the machine using Python. Just make sure your Python is up to date, minimal 3.6. But like I think most modern distributions have at least 3.6 for Python. Yeah, so you can deploy without Docker, and you can also deploy on a bare metal server just using Docker containers. So using Docker Compose. I think we provide examples for that. maybe we did at some point. We switched to focusing more on Helm charts and different ways. But yeah, so it should be pretty straightforward to spin up the Docker container just on a bare metal machine after installing Docker.
And I guess great. I was just gonna say the drawback of you have like a server in the room with you is that then you have to take care of it. Which is labor I am happy to outsource personally.
But like I see where that question is coming from. I know that like running Kubernetes clusters, especially the ones that are managed, they're quite expensive on Google Cloud. So it's quite innate to just host it on a single machine.
So I hope that answers your question, Nick. Detox Mingo says, can I ask for career/financial advice? I mean, you can feel free. I don't know that we're going to be able to give good advice, though. We're not. I'm certainly not a qualified financial advisor, but
me neither.
Yeah, Amina wants to know, in a story, can we have one intent, so something the user says, and then lots of actions after that?
Yeah, yes. Definitely. Why I don't see a reason why not.
So I think sort of a common pattern that I will use, where I have like the user says something and then I have a lot of actions, is the user will say something and I'm like, they want to start a form, so I'll, start the form and then, validate the form, and then maybe have some sort of like, if filling out the form triggers another action and maybe that one's going to run for a bit, I'll be like, great, looking for your information now. So the bot says something and then another action runs that looks up the information. And then finally I'll give the user that final information. So the user will be saying other things with the form, but there's just one like main intent identification that happens in there. So that would be an example of just like one turn that triggers a lot of other stuff. So yes, definitely doable. Dalish, sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly, says, hello, complete noob in the conversational AI platform cell. Oh, welcome to the space. I'm a data scientist. I want to use my NER models in a chatbot. Best resource on how to learn Rasa to do that. Okay, so you want to add some custom stuff to Rasa NLU, it looks like. Yeah.
So I mean, I think the docs are a great starting point in general. To just do a quick tutorial on how to create an assistant, and then the next thing that you'd like to explore is how to get your NER model into that assistant. And Rachel would know better if we have any video tutorials on that, or sure. I think we do have a documentation about custom components.
So the sort of general thing that you would do is you would add it to your pipeline. So it's I just want to see, I don't know why I did that. So I just want to see like an overview of the pipeline. So this is just a list of things that happen during your NLU pipeline or during your dialogue management. So this is a good example of the split between Rasa NLU and Rasa Core that we were talking about earlier, that they're sort of like modified in different ways. So what you would do is you would build, whatever it is that you're interested in, and then you would add it into your pipeline. And you'll probably want to customize your pipeline. Starting with 2.0, we sort of recommend a sensible default to make people's lives easier. But you would add it in sort of in here-ish, probably around the response selector, entity, synonym mapper. And if you're using custom entity extraction, I probably would not use Diet because Diet already does entity extraction. I'd probably use like one of the LSTM models for intent identification. Yeah.
And if you search, Rachel, if you search for custom components, there should be
just a page about it. Control K, custom. Okay.
And that should be kind of a good starting point to get your NER model into the Rasa entity pipeline.
Yeah, and if you find that it, works super well, feel free to brag on it. I don't want to promise that we will merge any components into Rasa main, but yeah, feel free to share it with other folks, because I'm sure they would also find it helpful. And then here's what the Python class looks like. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Talisha says yes. Fantastic. Randall says, re-Nick's question. I've seen someone said they deployed Rasa on a Raspberry Pi. That was Julian Gerhard. How effective is that? I actually just talked with him about this. And the answer is that it works, and it was a little bit of a struggle to get going. But he thinks it would probably be easier now, given the sort of updates on what Raspberry Pis can handle. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I actually tried it as well.
Oh, really?
And back in the day, the biggest struggle was to get TensorFlow running on there. So you need to compile that and so have all the dependencies that it needs. But yeah, putting that aside, I think that should be a lot easier nowadays. And I mean, the Pis have more and more memory nowadays, more CPU, so it should be doable.
Yeah. And let us know if you get that up and running. I think it's always helpful to have more examples. Ganesh says, hello, Tom and Rachel. Good morning, evening. Good morning, evening to you as well. Mia says, thank you. I'm very happy to help. Question from Ganesh. Would it be possible in Rasa X to provide every PR through an IVC information on which classification /NER the bot got right and wrong?
I think if I get your question right, you're talking about kind of proposing a change to the training data and then seeing how the bot performs on that change. And we actually do have a GitHub action around this as well. So it will pretty much do what you're looking for if your project is hosted on GitHub. You can add that as a workflow to your repository, and as soon as you create a PR, this workflow will train a bot and then test it and test data. And if you have kind of a main branch that also has some test data, it will compare these two, right? It will compare the performance on main to kind of the performance on your pull request that got created through IVC. And then you can see, is that an improvement, or does it decrease kind of performance on another intent maybe?
And I will, this may be old news for you, but just as a precaution, you're only going to be able to tell if the assistant was right or wrong if you have labeled data. If you could just tell if it was right or wrong on data it's never seen before, you have a fantastic assistant, and I think we would all like to know how that works. Yeah, and I just hear other questions. Question from Ganesh. What is the compensation of someone making neural network patents in security? Oh, I got no idea, my friend. I think it will depend dramatically on, where you are and, whether you have a law degree or not. Yeah, I would maybe look at roles you're interested in and check out similar roles at the same company on like something like Glassdoor. Yeah, good luck. It sounds like an interesting thing. Amina says, there's documentation about everything, but most of the time it is linked to a GitHub page in which there is an old example with Rasa 1. So that is a good thing to bring up. One thing to know, let me just pop this up, is that on demos that have multiple versions, you may need to switch a branch if you want to find the most recent version. So you can see there have been many versions and branches of Sarah in particular. So, and I know a lot of the demo bots as like showcases as well. We'll have different branches for different Rasa versions. So it may or may not fix the specific thing that you're interested in. And I might also file a GitHub issue if there's something where you find that a most recent version of the docs is linking to something that is only relevant in 1.x. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that, Tom.
No. I mean, we're working to kind of provide and update all the examples. It's getting harder and harder the more examples we provide. We're trying to catch up, so feel free to send us and point us in the forum to things that haven't been updated. We're going to lacking examples.
All right. More questions from Ganesh. Tom says, sorry, Nick says, thanks, Tom and Rachel. I have other exciting questions, but maybe next time. Thanks for the help. Yeah, I'll see you next week. Ganesh says, for IBC and Rasa X, does the Git repo need to have the training examples? I'm considering an architecture where all our training examples reside in a different database.
Yes, so for Rasa X, that training data needs to be in Git. And the reason why we made that decision is that we want different people and different personas working on the bot to contribute to it, right? And that means we want to make the training data as accessible as possible. And just Git is a great way to do that, as you can create pull requests, you can create suggestions to change the training data. So that's why we opted for that instead of storing it just in a database. I think that is quite a neat workflow.
Other additional questions, also from Ganesh. Same as for question 2, but with large model files. I want to still get IBC to work, but the model file is too big for the Git repo. It's bigger than a gig. That's a big model.
A big model. I don't think the model is stored in Git, though. But I don't think the model is stored in Git.
Yeah, I remember having this conversation with somebody else that when you train, the model is stored locally on your server.
Yes.
And then you have to retrain because you don't pull in the models from GitHub, even if they're there. Does that sound right? I'm vaguely remembering this.
It should be. You can add the models to Git, but yeah, I'd agree. If they're getting too large, they should be treated like any large binary block. Probably not version of it. Rather references. So we're also looking, and it might be another plug for 3.0, we're also looking into DBC as kind of, or other tools on how to store training data or kind of models externally in addition to the code. So yeah, we're looking into if that could be a good choice, right? Not promising anything, but certainly something that it's on our minds to kind of how to better store the trained models. Reference them from your code.
As you can tell, we've got a very, very short to-do list. Not that many things we're thinking about at any given time. I'm lying, there's a lot of things. And then re-question 1, which was, I believe, about the scheduling of things. No, sorry. It was about the providing every pull request with information on sort of accuracy. Which, if you're not using Rasa test for your assistant, I would recommend it. So we have it doesn't test your actions right now, but a way to test the conversation part of your conversation. Hello. I'm looking to deploy some automation based on whether the bot in production got it right or wrong, like some sort of threshold. Yeah. I'd probably use Rasa test for that. Yeah, I can pull that up as well. And I know we're getting pretty close to time, and I don't want to keep Tom too late. But the basic idea is that you write a test story, and then you run this command, and you'll get a bunch of information back on various components and how well they did. And then question 4 and finish, and I think this is going to end up being our last question, is in your experience, which tools have people used to store and manage more than 100,000 training examples?
That's a really good question, and I still stick with Git. So if you take a look at how large a file is with 100,000 training examples, it's still very manageable in text files in Git. And at that point, you should probably try to split them up. So we have support to multiple training data files. And if you have such a large amount of training data, probably a good idea to kind of try to split them up into subdomains or intents or whatever you'd like to, wherever kind of that amount of training samples is, entity or source. But yeah, split it up, and then I still stick with Git.
That is the nice thing about working with text data, is that it is not as big as images or videos.
Yeah.
Or audio.
Yeah, exactly.
Ganesh says, I understand. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you for answering them. I hope this was helpful. All right. So it is time. Thank you so much for joining today, Tom.
You're welcome.
I had a lot of fun. I hope you had fun. I hope our audience had fun as well.
I did have fun, so
Good.
We should do this again.
We should. Other streams this week. Tomorrow we're going to be reading a paper, and so last week I asked what sort of papers y'all wanted to see more of, and overwhelmingly system papers. What are people doing? So it's going to be cybersecurity assistant built with Rasa, which sounds really fun. So especially if you're interested in cybersecurity, I would recommend that you tune in and tell me more things about it, because it's not really my main area of interest. And then on Friday, we'll be doing live coding. Speaking of testing, I know that we talked about deployment last week, but I realized as I was working on a different assistant that I'd never written any tests for this one. So that's what we'll be doing on Friday. And we'll talk a little bit about model validation versus testing, and sort of like what the difference is and what's important. So there's some folks who asked about this, so I think it might be helpful for you. All right, so I'll see you tomorrow or Friday, same time as this stream. Thank you so much for joining, Tom. And I'll see y'all on the forum.